Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome to the video. Welcome to my garage. Hopefully you saw my last video where I finally got Ratchet out for his actual first shakedown run. The shakedown run went really well, had a lot of fun. However, there were 4 takeaways that I need to address before his next run. So in this video, I'm going to go over and hopefully rectify most of those takeaways. Okay, the 4 issues right out in the front here. Number 1, it was bottoming out over the bigger jumps. Obviously, that's no good. Axles were clicking at full droop. That's no good either, so I need to look into that. The idle was falling when I was chopping the throttle at high RPM, but I've already got a check mark on this because I've already started tweaking that a little bit in the ECU, and roll bar padding is the last item. But let's start initially by looking at the biggest one here, which is bottoming out. So if we come down underneath here, you should be able to see the skid plates are all bent here. You can even see a line here where the skid plate was bending over here, and then it couldn't really bend here because that's where this piece of steel here is. So I need to take this skid plate off, and I need to hammer them out a little bit to flatten them out. But mainly, I want to get them off so that I can inspect this piece, make sure that nothing was damaged. And if you look at the screws, they're a little bit bent, which isn't really surprising. These are just riv nut threads, so I need to straighten those out a little bit. This, you can see this clean mark is where it was compressing, and then this dirty mark is where it was not compressing. So it looks like I've got about 2.5 inches that I need to push this bump stop out so that the bump stop will actually hit and fully compress before the chassis hits the ground. And I kind of knew at some point I was going to have to do this. I didn't think it would be this far off, but the suspension is designed for 35-inch tires. These are 33s. These are used. Their tread is really worn down. So not only are they're not 33s, they actually measure like to 32. So their smaller diameter is making it so that I need to push the bump stops further out so that I can stop the wheels from traveling up before the chassis hits the ground. And I learned firsthand that that's critical because when the chassis hits the ground is no good. So that's the first thing that I'm going to go after. I'm going to go after that right now. Okay, so now I've got the springs removed, and I've got this side jacked up. I jacked it up to the point where the dust mark was on the bump stop, so I know that at the track, this is as far as it was going, which tells me that at this point, the chassis was hitting the ground. And if you look underneath here, you guys might not be able to see this, but it was hitting right here, and it was also hitting up front here. So it seems to tell me that when it was coming down, it was hitting pretty flat. And the front, there's no signs of the front hitting at all, which makes sense because the front was designed for those tires. So what I've done is I took a measurement in this position from the bottom of the tire to the ground. Right now is 16 inches. And over here, from the part of the chassis that was hitting the ground to the floor here is 17 and a half inches. And at first I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why is it hitting? And then I realized, I don't know why I didn't think of this earlier, but the tire is probably squishing an inch and a half. And that's why this is saying 16, but it was probably going up an inch and a half. And even in some of the photos I have, you can see the front tires are squishing what looks like probably an inch and a half. So I think this is accurate. This is as far as it was going, right there. And then the chassis was hitting. So there are a couple things to consider at this point. Number one, I had the bypasses set very, very soft. From my first run, I thought the suspension was actually too tight. So when I first noticed that it was bottoming out, I really tightened up the bypass shocks. So I think that initially is going to make a big difference. But now I think I'm going to make a spacer for the bump stop. So I measured this distance right here, and it is 1 7/8 inches. So if I cut a spacer that will push this bump stop down, 1 7/8 inches, then right here, this would be completely bottomed out. But I don't think that would do me any good because at this point it was already hitting the ground. So I think what I'll do is, if this is 1 7/8 inches, I think I'll make a 2.5 inch spacer in here. And that should make it so that at this point, this tire would be down 2.5 inches further. And I think it would have to squish more if I was even going to hit. I don't want to go too far. I don't want to go like 3 inches or anything. So I'm going to start with 2.5. I might cut a 3-inch and bring it with me at the track just in case. But for starters, let me make a 2.5 inch spacer for this. Okay, so now I've got this piece right here is a 2.5 inch spacer. It's actually a 3-inch, but that's because these already had a 1/2 inch spacer on them. So I'm going to take this spacer off. This one will give me 2.5 plus another 1/2 for this one. So this is my 3-inch spacer. It's very thin. It's a little bit undersized, so I slid it here and just slid it over, and it just needs to grab this little tiny lip right here. And it's actually a little bit larger than that lip, so I think this should be just fine. So I'm going to go install it in there now, crank this up all the way, and let's see where it sits. All right, now I've got the bump stop in there with the spacer. The suspension is jacked up. It's tightly hitting the bump stop, so let me see what our new numbers are. So we got 15. And that is still 17 and a half, which it should. So before I was at 16, 17 and a half, and the chassis was hitting, I had 1 7/8 inches of space left. I cut that piece at 2.5 plus the 1/2 for the spacer that was in there, but essentially I went from 1 7/8 inches to 2.5, so that's 5/8 that this is sticking. It should have been sticking down a little farther. It's actually 1 inch. That's probably just because of the geometry for that bump stop. It's probably not linear. Either way, now at full compression, I've got 2.5 inches basically of tire squish before the chassis should hit Last time it seemed to be happening at 1.5 inches, so I've got an extra inch. And I'm going to be tightening everything up in the suspension as far as the bump stops go. However, I'd rather be stopping a little bit too early than not early enough. So I'm going to leave this right where it is. At the next run, I'll have a camera in here so I can keep my eye on things, but I'm going to leave it as is for now. So there's one other thing I want to point out here, just because I don't like to mislead you guys. So I've added this humongous spacer in here, and that is making it so that my bump stop, this is at the bump stop fully extended, and it's just starting to make contact here. You can see that the angle between these is pretty intense, and that's going to cause a lot of force this way on this bump stop. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm rigging this to work outside of its design, because these tires are 32 inches and I laid everything out to work with 35-inch tires. So these tires are not going to be long term. Now that I know the trouble they're causing me, I am going to leave this for now until I get larger tires, because I still want to go to the track. But this is not ideal where I'm making it work with the tires here. But the reason I'm okay with that is I would rather sacrifice that bump stop than sacrifice the chassis, meaning I do not want the chassis hitting at all. So if I'm going to prematurely wear out this bump stop and then have to replace that bump stop, I'd rather do that than have any chassis issues. So I just wanted to point that out, because this is, you shouldn't have a 3-inch spacer in there. That's kind of ridiculous, but it should work for me in the short term. All right, now I think I got the bottoming out taken care of for now. So I'm going to go over to my list here and give that a check. So now I got to look at the axles clicking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take Ratchet to the edge of the garage, spin him around, jack him up so that I can pop the wheels off, because I want to start it up, put it in like 3rd or 5th gear, and I want to watch things spin, and I just want to see if I can possibly see what might be going on in there. All right, now we got Ratchet turned back around and put back where he was originally. So let me go to axles clicking, and I can give that a check. And then the only last thing is the roll bar padding. I'll do that soon, but I'm not going to check that one off right now. All right, so you saw me jack up the rear, and I was running it with the tires on, tires off, second gear, third gear, fifth gear. I was trying to simulate it, and what I was finding out is I could hear it from time to time. That one clip where I noted it with the tires on, you could hear it the most there. And to be honest with you, I don't think I know exactly what the noise is, but I can tell you it would get loud when I would let the clutch in or out. It was also louder with the tires on. I guess that means it has to be the CVs, but the axles, they're not tight, and they still have play in them even when they're at full droop, and they're only at 22 degrees at full droop, which for these CVs is not maxed out. So I don't know if just at full droop they're transferring more vibration from the transaxle out. I'm not sure. It did satisfy me enough that I'm not worried that the CV joints are binding and clicking that way, because although I can hear a little bit of clicking, it's hard to even tell if they're coming from the CVs. And when I hold the shaft as it's running, it doesn't really feel that rough or anything. So I'm just gonna keep running it like it is, and then I'm sure I'll do a teardown inspection in 6 months or something and just make sure that the CVs aren't tearing themselves up. And I'll pay attention to it to see if it gets louder or anything over time. But for now, I'm comfortable enough knowing that I don't think they're gonna explode. I wish I could find out exactly what the clicking is, but you know, I know more now than I did before I did that little test. Let's leave it at that. So that's it for the takeaways from the shakedown run. Obviously, the big one on there was the bottoming out. I could not go back out to the track until I resolved the bottoming out issue. I think what I did here, this will need to be readjusted when I get the proper sized tires on here, whenever that happens. But in the meantime, I should be able to go back to the track now, and I should be able to jump just like I was. And with the spacers that I put in there, I think that'll save me from hitting the chassis on the ground. So I hope you guys appreciated seeing the little repairs I tried to do there from the shakedown run. And I hope to see you on the next video when I get to take it out and beat the crap out of it some more.